We're joining you today to share a compilation of some of our best videos that are set at sea. Some say our early videos are as rough as the seas in a Force 12 gale. But if you like a bit of vintage spirit, then join us now and the old Sea Cat on an epic adventure on the high seas. It's a dark, foggy morning on May the 24th, 1941, off the coast of Iceland. Task Force Commander Gunter Lutyens stares out of the bridge into the darkness. He has orders to reach the Atlantic and raid cargo vessels headed for Britain. For this task, he has the most feared ship in Europe under his command, the flagship of the German Navy, the terror of the seas, the Bismarck. Alongside them is the Prinz Eugen, a heavy cruiser powerful in its own right. Lutyens was not feeling the grand ship's power. If anything, it only made him more tense. She is mighty, but the Royal Navy has the numbers. With less than half the force initially intended for this mission, Lutyens was feeling very much vulnerable. "Smoke trails spotted on the horizon, sir." Lutyens looks out the window. The dreaded fight had come. "Call the crew to battle stations," he orders. Alarms ring in both vessels, and the crews scramble to their posts as two battleships, the HMS Prince of Wales and the mighty HMS Hood, appear over the horizon. The range is 26 kilometers and closing when the first muzzle flash from the enemy vessels pierces the morning darkness, signaling the incoming shells. Lutyens simply watches as massive towers of water rise in front of the Prinz Eugen, the shells falling short. Bismarck Captain Ernst Lindemann calls to Lutyens, "Permission to open fire." He receives no response. Lutyens is weighing his options. He knows Bismarck is quick, and engaging the Royal Navy is the last thing he wants with his reduced force. Maybe there's a chance he can outrun them. More shells fall around the vessels. "Permission to open fire," repeats Lindemann, increasingly agitated. The enemies are getting closer. There's no outrunning this. Lutyens relents. "Open fire." The thunder of the guns reverberates throughout the ship as they propel the massive 15-inch shells across the sky and screaming towards the hood. They miss and impact the sea. The flagship of the Kriegsmarine and the pride of the Royal Navy trade blows. The HMS Hood is hit by the Prinz Eugen, starting a fire that is quickly contained. A massive bang reverberates through the Bismarck. "We've been hit," an officer reports. Lutyens doesn't react. Bismarck fires its fifth salvo, and it strikes the Hood. A fateful shot to send shockwaves throughout the British Empire. A column of fire lights up the night sky, rising from the deck like a blowtorch before a catastrophic explosion tears the ship in half. In a final act of defiance, a single shot is fired from the doomed ship before it sinks under the waves. Lutyens, however, is unmoved, and in his characteristic cold demeanor, he orders to immediately focus fire on the Prince of Wales. The turrets swing towards the new target, and they fire, sending 8 1,760-pound shells streaking across the sky towards the remaining enemy. Lookouts report multiple hits on target as the fight progresses, but the HMS Prince of Wales soldiers on. The Bismarck is struck 2 more times herself until the Prince of Wales finally retreats from the battle. "Let's chase them down," suggests Lindemann, but Lutyens refuses, sticking to his orders of engaging the Royal Navy as little as possible. He orders to continue on instead. Bismarck has suffered damage on the floatplane crane, torpedo bulkhead, and on the forecastle. She begins to flood and oil leaks into the ocean. As the damage reports come in, Lutyens learns that the repairs are badly needed. Despite this, he refuses to slow the ship to get them done, as he knows at least 2 heavy cruisers are shadowing him. They need to get some distance first. What's clear is that the Bismarck is too wounded to continue the mission. They need to get back to port. Prinz Eugen is undamaged, so Lutyens decides that the Prinz Eugen will detach from the Bismarck and continue the mission alone, while Bismarck heads to Saint-Nazaire for repairs. Meanwhile, far above, a British Sunderland flying boat follows Bismarck's oil streak until spotting the ship. They report her position and the British gather all available warships to hunt her down. With the weather worsening, Lütjens decides it's a good moment to detach Prince Eugen. The two ships part ways, seeing each other for the last time. The darkness falls upon the Atlantic when an officer alerts Lütjens. "Lookouts report incoming planes, Admiral." Lütjens orders the men to battle stations and the secondary guns to be turned to maximum depression on the direction of the planes. Alarms sound in the Bismarck. The sky is lit up with anti-aircraft fire as Swordfish torpedo bombers line up their passes. Lütjens orders to fire the secondary guns into the sea in front of the path of the planes. The splash of the shells creates pillars of water that they must evade, but it's of no use. The torpedoes are away and the planes successfully escape, not a single one shot down. Lindemann orders evasive maneuvers, but despite them, just one of the 9 torpedoes impacts the armor belt. It does little damage, but the abrupt direction change and maneuvers loosen the collision mats covering the hull from the previous battle. The Bismarck is given some luck as the British lose track of her while trying to avoid German submarines. Time was running out though for the Germans, and in the morning of May the 26th, a Catalina finds the battleship. That night, another Swordfish raid swoops upon the Bismarck. Alarms blare one more time, and the crew repeat the strategy of the morning. Anti-aircraft fire lights up the night sky as the torpedo bombers approach. The seemingly obsolete Swordfish are flying so low and slow. Bismarck's fire control predictors built for newer planes have a hard time giving accurate predictions, and heavy AA guns struggle tracking them. Even when hit, the German fire passes through the old string bags. The plumes of water made by the secondary guns, while ingenious, proves little more than a nuisance for the attackers. The bombers drop their payloads, and the fish are away. Lindemann orders evasive maneuvers, but it's too late. A torpedo impacts amidship and does little, but a second explodes right on the rudder, jamming it. The Swordfish fly away, leaving the vessel alive, but wounded. Repairs are attempted and they successfully fix one of the 2 rudders. But despite their best attempts, it's not enough. An hour later, Lütjens reports the ship is unmaneuverable. It's now stuck at sea, sailing in circles. What little maneuverability they have left results in little more than wobbles. Mood on board darkens quickly as the realization of their likely fate sets in. At 1 a.m. on May the 27th, Lütjens transmits for the final time. "We will fight to the last, believing in you, my Führer, and with rock-hard trust in Germany's victory." The ship is harassed throughout the night by enemy destroyers, but the true danger wouldn't come until the morning, in the form of HMS Rodney and HMS King George V. Alarms sound on board as the crew board their battle stations, determined to fight till the end. Muzzle flashes shine from Rodney and water splashes fall short of the Bismarck. Lütjens orders to open fire. Bismarck fights back, but the unsteady course makes it difficult to find range and fire accurately. Lütjens can do little but watch as the enemy shells land closer and closer with each shot. Then, Rodney fires a salvo, and everything goes dark. The shell impacts right on the forward superstructure, decimating the bridge. All of the top command die in the blast. Bismarck continues to fight under the command of lower officers, but it's of no effect. The unstable ship doesn't allow the remaining sailors to fire a straight shot, and Rodney continues to punish the vessel mercilessly. Fire consumes the ship, and the guns are put out of action, one by one. By 9:30, Bismarck has fired for the final time. The British ships close in, continuing to fire unopposed. The vessel has fallen under the command of the chief of the damage repair stations, who reluctantly orders to set scuttling charges and abandon ship. By 10 a.m., Bismarck has been reduced to a floating, burning wreck. The charges are set off 20 minutes later, and Bismarck, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, sinks into the ocean. Out of the 2,200 young men on board serving, only 114 are pulled alive from the water. It's March the 28th, 1942. At 1 a.m., HMS Campbelltown, a World War I era destroyer that has been loaned to the British by the US, is making its way up the Loire estuary in France. Lieutenant Commander Stephen Sam Beatty watches as German anti-aircraft guns on both shores flash and crack away at more than 60 RAF bombers making diversionary attacks nearby. In makeshift compartments below the ship's foredeck, demolition experts recheck the time fuses connected to 7 tons of explosive charges, while hundreds of seamen and commandos ready themselves for the onslaught to come. Then, through the darkness, they see the target for the first time in the distance, the massive Normandy dry dock at Saint-Nazaire. On the Atlantic coast, it's the only place capable of carrying out repairs on the 42,000-ton battleship Tirpitz, terror of the North Atlantic and sister ship to Bismarck, which met a violent end just a year before. At a nearby observation post, German naval officers struggle to make out the silhouettes of the Campbelltown and several wooden Fairmile ships following behind. The Campbelltown is flying the German flag and has been disguised to make it look like a German destroyer. Signaling the ship, the Campbelltown responds with the correct code. It's an older code, but it checks out. The Germans illuminate the flotilla with searchlights. The warning shot fired across the bow is one the Brits have been expecting. In response, they launch a flare that burns a bright emerald green before splitting into 3 distinct red clusters, the Kriegsmarine signal for recognition. At 0130, the Germans realize they're being fooled, and all hell breaks loose as the many guns on the estuary start taking chunks out of the British. Aboard the beleaguered ships, the German flags are hastily lowered and replaced by Royal Navy ensigns. Caught in a maelstrom of fire, Campbelltown and the others are sustaining heavy damage. Their decks are strewn with debris and injured men, and the very success of the mission is now in serious doubt. Realizing that the moment calls for guts and leadership above all else, from the destroyer's armored bridge, Beatty shouts, "Full speed ahead!" and "Prepare for ramming!" Campbelltown lurches forward until with an epic crunch, a massive concussion, the old destroyer slams into the dock's outer wall and gates. A gaping 30-foot section is torn into her steel bow, but the crippled warship comes to rest, perfectly positioned with the bomb hanging over the heavily damaged wall. Knocked down by the impact, Beatty turns to his men and said, "Here we are, men." Just 4 minutes late. Now it's the commandos' turn, and they clamber down ropes and ladders onto the dock and into the dark water. The commandos successfully take out the 2 winding stations and an underground pumping station. With their missions as complete as they're ever likely to be, the commandos regroup, attend to their wounded, and patiently wait for the motor launchers, originally scheduled to whisk them away to safety. But when getting to the jetty, they see just a sea of flame, where the flimsy British launchers have been decimated by the Germans. Tired, wounded, hungry, low on ammo, and surrounded by 5,000 Germans hell-bent on settling the score, they split into small groups, hiding in warehouses, gardens, and gutters to evade capture. But most are shot or taken into custody. The following morning, most of the remaining men are captured, and the Campbelltown still hasn't exploded. Inspection teams fail to find the explosives and look for souvenirs. The British realize that the bomb could go off at any time, but no one says a word, despite being perilously close to the blast zone, and some men even being taken back on board the ship. At 10:35 in the morning, Beatty is being mocked by an interrogator. "It was no good ramming the gates of the dry dock with a flimsy ship," he said. At that precise moment, there was an earth-shattering detonation. The force is so great that the Campbelltown's bow and most of the wall are irreparably damaged, and more than 400 lives are lost, most of which were unsuspecting Germans still on board the Campbelltown, as well as 2 incredibly brave captured commandos who kept their mouths shut despite knowing full well that they were about to be blown into oblivion. It's September 1943. Nazi Germany's Behemoth battleship Tirpitz, sister ship to the Bismarck, lays moored in Norway's Alten Fjord. The battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Lützow lie nearby. At nearly 800 feet, Tirpitz is the most formidable of the trio. But despite her reputation, fuel shortages and the Germans' unwillingness to risk her in combat have relegated Tirpitz and her nearly 2,000 seamen to hiding in Norwegian backwaters to avoid detection by RAF reconnaissance aircraft. Referred to with derision as the Lonely Queen of the North, from October 1940 the RAF threw everything but the kitchen sink at Tirpitz. But the Stirling and Halifax heavy bombers, Albacore biplanes and manned Chariot torpedoes did little more than annoy the steel Leviathan. Recently, things have been quiet, but that's all about to change. In Scotland, 1,000 miles away, 22-year-old Worcestershire-born Lieutenant Basil Charles Godfrey Place gazes across the waters of Loch Cairnborn, eagerly awaiting orders to commence Operation Source. It's a daring plan to send 6 X-craft or mini-subs to destroy Tirpitz, Scharnhorst and Lützow. Each tiny sub is crewed by just 4 submariners and displaces a paltry 30 tons. Powered by batteries when submerged, they're barely capable of 5.5 knots. The tiny cabins reek of sweat, battery acid and engine oil, and though they've been dive tested to 300 feet, crews fear descending past 100 may be suicidal. Elevate your summer style with our exclusive merch. Head on over to yarnhubstore.com to shop our latest designs, from stylish tees to cozy hoodies, and be the envy of all your friends. Plus, by purchasing our merch, you're directly supporting our channel and helping us create even more great content for you. But that's not all. Become a member of our YouTube channel and gain access to even more exclusive perks, from deleted scenes to VIP Discord chats with me, and experience the best of Yarn Hub as a Yarn Hub VIP. Accompanied by Lieutenant Cameron and X6 on September the 21st, Place deftly steers X7 through a web of mines to a position off the Bratholm Islands, just as the fleeing Scharnhorst steams past at 1630 hours. The following evening, after a tense day confined to their subs avoiding detection, the outer barrier around Tirpitz miraculously opens to allow a small German surface vessel to pass through, and seizing the opportunity, the sub's crews dive their craft and fall in behind it before it's reclosed. The X6 strikes rock and is spotted by lookouts on the Tirpitz, but Cameron and crew manage to put their charges beneath the ship. Realizing escape is impossible, they scuttle their sub, surrender, and are taken aboard the ship. Unseen in the commotion, Place and the crew of the X7 are stuck in torpedo nets. They have to surface. With extraordinary luck, the X7 somehow manages to escape the nets, and at nearly full speed it strikes the Tirpitz on her port side with a resounding clang, then slides smoothly under her keel and deposits a charge on the fjord's floor. Then X7 heads on its way astern and releases a second charge 200 feet to the aft, after which the X7 becomes ensnared yet again. Knowing that the X6's charge are due to explode any minute, Place, always the master of understatement, describes the affair as extremely annoying. A charge goes off and the X7 is buffeted by the water, but in a stroke of luck the blast frees them once again. But upon surfacing, Place opines that it's tiresome that the Tirpitz is still afloat. Moments later, at 1940 hours, the X7 is spotted attempting to escape and is fired upon with heavy anti-aircraft guns and depth charges. 2 of the 4 crewmen are killed, and again they're entangled, this time hopelessly so. Damned nets, they're everywhere, Place said. Their craft damaged and immobile, 2 crewmen dead and staring into the eyes of angry machine gun-wielding sailors looming above them. Place realizes the game is up, and he and the surviving sailor are taken aboard Tirpitz, joining Cameron and the crew of the X6. Initially, the Germans think that the daring British submarines are Norwegian partisans. They're interrogated intensely, but divulge no meaningful information. Still unaware that their mighty ship is in peril, 30 minutes later, 2 massive explosions lift Tirpitz nearly 3 feet from the water, severely damaging her hull, keel, engines, turrets, and propeller shafts. In the chaos, X5, the last remaining mini-sub, is detected 200 meters off Tirpitz and sunk in a hail of gunfire and depth charges, and neither sub nor the crew are ever seen again. Place and the other 5 sailors are eventually whisked away to the prison camp at Marlag Millag Nord, where they spend the rest of the war. But though their attack crippled the Tirpitz, repairs were carried out until April 1944, an epic undertaking that naval historians often refer to as one of the war's most noteworthy feats of naval engineering. Exhibiting heroism, fearlessness, and staunch determination in the fear of near certain death, even today, Place was considered the very embodiment of the submarine service's ideals. For his part in the Tirpitz attack, which a colleague described as entirely consistent with his character, he was awarded the Victoria Cross. It's October the 24th, 1944. On board the destroyer USS Johnston, Commander Ernest Edwin Evans is proceeding with the usual routine. Evans is loved by the crew, who call him Big Chief. On the commissioning ceremony for USS Johnston, he told his men, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." Today, the carrier group is providing air support to the landings of Leyte Gulf, leaving destroyers like the Johnston with little to do. But all of that is about to change. A radio transmission from a patrolling plane warns of an incoming enemy fleet. The Japanese center force has slipped through undetected and is barreling down upon them. "I can see pagoda masts. I can see the biggest meatball flag on the biggest battleship I ever saw." Alarms blare across the fleet. All men are called to battle stations. Lookouts are on high alert. Planes on patrol are diverted to engage the enemy, and planes on the carriers are hurriedly prepared for takeoff. The fleet are ordered to head for a storm in the distance. A lookout then makes the dreaded call.
"Ships are on the horizon."
Rising from the waves are 23 vessels of the Imperial Japanese Navy, 11 destroyers, 2 light cruisers, 6 heavy cruisers, and 4 battleships, one of which is the biggest battleship ever, the mighty Yamato. The American fleet is completely outclassed. With their 7 destroyers and 6 carriers, the Yamato alone weighs more than the entirety of Taffy 3 combined. Gunnery officer of the USS Johnston, Lieutenant Robert C. Hagen, would later state, "We felt like David without a slingshot." Immediately, the aircraft carriers launch every plane they have, with whatever ordnance they have fitted. Commander Evans leads the USS Johnston as they zigzag in the water between the carriers and the enemy fleet, deploying a smoke screen, a wall of smoke to cover the carriers. Above him, planes roar into battle as soon as they take off. The cannons fire for the first time on that fateful day. They're color-coded so that the Japanese can find the range accurately. The fleet can do nothing but pump smoke and run. Their weapons are out of range. But a different story is taking place in the sky. The fighter pilots of the American forces charge into battle. Armed with high explosives and depth charges, they're unfit to attack battleships, but they're undeterred. Explosions rock the decks of the Japanese ships, devastating exposed anti-air emplacements and personnel, but doing little against the ship's main cannons. Back on the Johnston, the situation is worsening quick. Both the splashes of color and the Japanese fleet itself are rapidly closing in on the Americans. But fortunately, the Japanese misjudge their range advantage and they wander too close to the destroyers. Commander Evans sees that the smokescreen is good enough, and finding himself in the rear of the formation, he orders,
"Rudder, hard left."
and the USS Johnston charges, zigzagging against the enemy without any orders from the Admiral. Once they got within 19,000 yards, Commander Evans orders,
"Fire!"
and the ship's 5-inch turrets unleash their limited power. They attack the nearest cruiser they can see, firing upon its weaker superstructure. Their power may leave a lot to be desired, but the American accuracy helps use them to the fullest. The Johnston's gun control radar is making the difference in the heavy haze. They tear through the superstructure of IJN Kumano, starting fires and sending shrapnel across the deck as 14-inch shells splash around them. One of the enemy shells impacts inches away from the bow, showering the deck in red dye, including Lieutenant Hagen. He wipes it off his eyes, shouting,
"Looks like somebody's mad at us."
As the USS Johnston turns back, Commander Evans orders the launch of all 10 torpedoes towards an enemy battleship as they continue to pump smoke into the air. The fleet finally reaches the storm, but the Johnston is still fighting. She's dumped over 200 rounds into the enemy ships when their luck runs out. The Yamato fires her 18-inch main cannons straight at the Johnston. 3 of the highest caliber shells to ever see combat in the high seas crash into the destroyer. Evans holds on as the impact shakes the entire hull. He hardly has time to compose himself when an explosion throws him to the ground. 3 more 6-inch shells from the Yamato's secondary guns have slammed into the ship, with one of them impacting and detonating behind the bridge. The explosion has tore through the bridge's port wing and has sent shrapnel flying. Evans opens his eyes laying on the floor. He's been struck several times and is bleeding. Around him is an apocalyptic scene of bodies and destruction. Standing up, Evans places his left hand on the floor and realizes he's missing 2 fingers. Still, he pushes through the pain and returns to his post. He orders the Johnston to retreat for the cover of smoke as fast as possible. As the USS Johnston limps to safety, Evans looks back just in time to witness a huge explosion off the bow of IJN Kumano. Several of their torpedoes had been hits. Medics arrive at the bridge and Commander Evans is quickly tended to. He has his injuries bandaged but refuses painkillers, telling the medics to save them for the others. His shirt in tatters, Evans rips off what's left of it. Simultaneously below deck, the technicians are working their magic. Johnston had lost power to the aft of the ship, which had taken out 2 guns, steering, and the radar. They bring it all back online in just 10 minutes. Flooding compartments are isolated, and the condition of the ship is successfully stabilized. Meanwhile, the air battle rages with force. There is no organized waves, just a chaotic swarm of planes and tracers. Fighters from nearby Taffy 2 had joined in the fray, and even more of Taffy 1 arrive one by one to aid Taffy 3's plight. They're suffering from the same improper loadout issues as the Taffy 3 fighters, but they harass the enemy for all it's worth. Back on the Johnston, Commander Evans receives a transmission from Admiral Sprague, ordering all destroyers to charge for a torpedo run. The USS Johnston is crippled and out of torpedoes, but Evans orders his men to charge anyway. They'll cover their brothers. They push into the smoke-covered battlefield. Visibility is terrible, making Evans wary of friendly fire. He orders Gunnery Officer Hagen not to fire with the radar, only if he can see the enemy.
Until you see it with your eyes, Hagen.
Shortly after, an unmistakable pagoda mast belonging to the battleship IJN Congo emerges from the fog. Hagen shouts,
I sure as hell can see that. Fire!
The USS Johnston's crew opens up onto the battleship with all they have, peppering the enemy's superstructure as they dodge the 14-inch return fire. Back with the fleet, the aircraft carriers have taken an absolute beating. They've been wrecked by the incessant shelling. Amidst the destruction, they spot the cruiser IJNS Haguro firing upon escort carrier Gambier Bay. Evans orders to cease fire on the battleship and refocus to the Haguro. He knows they are still unlikely to do much, but they'll try and draw their fire and buy the Gambier Bay some more time. Once again, they open up on the enemy's superstructure, attempting to inflict whatever damage they can, but the cruiser ignores the little destroyer as they relentlessly punish the carrier. Annoyed, Evans scans the waters for a target they might prove effective against and quickly spots 2 columns of destroyers headed for the rest of the carriers. Evans can tell a torpedo charge when he sees one. Japanese torpedoes are exceptionally powerful. Just 1 can tear a destroyer like his own in half, and 2 is a likely death sentence for a carrier. The charge must be stopped at all costs. They open fire on the leader of the formation, the light cruiser Yahagi. Her armor is much more easily pierced than the giant battleship and cruisers. They wreak havoc upon the ship with the help from fighters and bombers unloading up and down the deck. The Yahagi suffers greatly and turns back to retreat, being relieved by one of the destroyers. Quickly, both the Johnston and the planes switch their targets, and the new leader is lit up with lead. It too turns back, and the rest of the charge joins it in retreat. They drop their torpedoes towards the carriers, but the excessive range means the torpedoes stop and sink short. Evans can't believe their victory and mutters,
Now I've seen everything.
but the Johnston had no time to celebrate. Throughout, they've been avoiding heavy fire from almost every direction. They dodge and weave, but it was just a matter of time. A shell strikes against the bow, knocking out the forward turrets and starting a fire. The damaged Johnston slows to a crawl, and she becomes easy pickings. Another shell strikes her, followed by another and another. Evans lost all control in the bridge. Power is completely out. The fires are spreading, and an ammo storage near the bridge is lit up. Unwilling to give up, Evans abandons the bridge and runs through smoke and flames to the stern. He opens a hatch leading directly to the rudder equipment, where 4 men are cranking it manually. He barks directional orders at the men, trying desperately to lead the ship to safety as the battle still rages around him. Shells zip past, and 2 guns of the Johnston fire away to the bitter end. In the middle of it all, he spots another Allied ship sailing by, the USS Samuel B. Roberts, returning from her own heroic deeds. The 2 captains lock eyes, and Evans waves at his peer with his bandaged and bloodied hand as the ship sails by. A few minutes later, a shell pierces and explodes within the last operational engine. USS Johnston is now a motionless, burning wreck. Standing defiantly on her stern, beaten and bloodied, Commander Evans knows the USS Johnston's time has come. He orders to abandon ship. It's the last time he was ever seen. The men run across the vessel, spreading the word and deploying life rafts before jumping into the sea below. A Japanese ship approaches the Johnston as it slowly rolls over on its side. The terrified men expect a bloodbath, but instead, they see the Japanese captain standing on the bridge. He salutes the brave sailors and continues on. The 141 survivors would be picked up from the water after 28 to 48 hours of floating adrift. Thanks to the heroic actions of the entirety of Taffy 3 and the aerial backup, the Japanese center fleet was turned away at all odds. Their victory thwarted the Japanese attempt of using battleships to crush the Allied landings on the Philippines. But it was hard fought. Over 1,000 men died across the entire fleet, and 900 more were wounded. Not a single vessel escaped without damage. Of the USS Johnston's 327 men crew, only 141 would return home. Commander Ernest Edwin Evans would be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions. He was the first Native American in the US Navy to be awarded the Medal of Honor. It's the early morning of October the 25th, 1944, near the Strait of San Bernardino in the Philippines. Lieutenant Commander Robert Witcher Copeland is having his morning coffee at the bridge of USS Samuel B. Roberts after a sleepless night patrolling the waters. They are part of Taffy 3, a carrier group made out of 6 escort carriers, 3 Fletcher-class destroyers, and 5 Butler-class escort destroyers, like his own. Their mission is to provide air support to the landings of Leyte Gulf, which leaves the destroyers in a simple bodyguard and patrol role. It's shaping up as an uneventful task. That is until he receives a radio transmission warning him of surface radar contacts heading their way. Copeland doesn't even have time to take any action before one of his lookouts reports,
Object on the horizon, sir.
Everyone to battle stations!
he orders without skipping a beat. Trouble lays ahead. In the distance, the center force of the Imperial Japanese Navy pushes into battle. It's made out of 11 destroyers, 2 light cruisers, 6 heavy cruisers, 3 battleships, and in the middle of them all is the biggest warship to ever grace the seas, the pride of the Imperial Navy, the Yamato. The commander of Taffy 3 immediately directs the carrier group to move east in haste and lay down smoke. Aircraft take off from the carriers and engage. The planes throw everything they can at the Japanese: bombs, torpedoes, depth charges, as well as strafing runs. But the Japanese force is just too vast, and the planes run out of ammunition and are forced to withdraw to rearm and refuel. Copeland relays the order, and the men activate the chemical smoke generators as well as overload the boilers with fuel, causing the vessel to billow black smoke out of the smokestack. As they do, Copeland spots massive, colourful splashes rising up from the waves. The Japanese are firing their first ranging shots. The rest of the destroyers mirror the USS Roberts, quickly deploying a vast wall of black and white smoke in front of the carriers as they continue their run east, heading straight for an isolated storm. The splashes get closer and closer as the Japanese gunners zero in on their targets, threatening to strike at any second. But to the Americans' fortune, they reach a rain squall and visibility drops drastically. The torrent of rain and the smokescreen combine to hide the vulnerable ships from the Japanese. The bombardment continues though, but with limited visibility it becomes inaccurate and slows to a crawl, giving the fleet precious time to regroup and prepare. Copeland is still coordinating the release of smoke when he receives a transmission from the commander. All destroyers are ordered to attack with torpedoes. Copeland swiftly asks if the commander wants Butler-class and Fletcher-class to attack simultaneously. The response comes back negative. The Fletcher-class are to go in first. The Fletcher-class ships push out into battle. Copeland is left waiting, listening to the thunder of guns through the mist and smog. The wait is tortuous. He thinks to himself, "My God, how are we going to work this?" Contemplating the dangers ahead, he gets on the loudspeaker and tells the crew,
"This will be a fight against overwhelming odds, from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can."
The Fletchers complete the attack run and race away into the relative safety of the smokescreen, receiving strike after strike from the enemy fleet. Amidst the chaos, the second attack run isn't organized, and the Butler-class destroyers hesitate as to when to start. But Copeland doesn't wait. He slams the EOT to full power, and the ship charges into battle. He sails straight into the enemy at 20 knots. He identifies the heavy cruiser, Chikai, as a first big target nearby, almost in ideal position for torpedo attack, and orders to go straight for it. Enemy shells begin falling around him, but they push on fearlessly. Amidst the hellfire, he radios Lieutenant Trowbridge, the engineering officer, and tells him,
Lucky, as soon as we fire our fish, I will ring up flank speed and you give me everything you got.
The shelling intensifies. Geysers of seawater lift into the sky all around them, some striking mere yards away. A shell impacts the ship's mast, and the debris rains down upon the deck. A metal beam strikes the torpedo launcher, jamming it. Copeland is warned, but fortunately, the launcher is already aiming overboard. Already committed to the run, he eyeballs a new attack approach to account for the angle of the launchers and keeps going. Shells continue to pummel the sea surrounding him, but they too miss by sheer luck. Coming in hot, 4,000 yards away from Chikai, Copeland orders, "Fire!" And the 3 torpedoes dive into the seas. The fish are away. The ship immediately turns to escape, and Copeland slams the EOT to flanking speed. Below deck, Trowbridge bypasses every safety measure. The boiler pressure rockets past its design limit, and the ship accelerates to a blistering 28 knots.
She cannot take much more, Captain.
Behind them, the HIJMS Chikai is rocked by an explosion as one of the torpedoes hits its mark. But they have no time to celebrate as other ships keep up their rain of shells. They keep running with all they have, zigzagging through a storm of high explosives. In the middle of it all, Copeland sees an Allied destroyer torn to pieces, limping along. The captain is standing on her stern, bloodied and hurt, still commanding the ship by shouting orders down a hatch to the engine room below. The captain gives Copeland a friendly wave as they sail by in the midst of battle. Copeland returns to a devastating scene. Nearly the entire fleet has suffered heavy damage, yet they still fight. Copeland radios his gunners and orders to open fire upon the nearest enemy, the cruiser Chikuma. The 5-inch weapons fire upon the cruiser. They are pitiful compared to the firepower wielded by the Japanese, but the gunners are determined to make it count. They fire round after round into the exposed superstructure of the Chikuma, all the while dodging 8-inch fire themselves. Inside turret number 2, the gunner's mate 3rd class, Paul Henry Carr, fires anything and everything that comes up the ammunition hoist. Armor-piercing, high-explosive, AA proximity fuse, even smoke and star shells used for lighting up battlefields at night. A similar scene takes place in turret number 1, as the little destroyer tears through the superstructure of the Chikuma. Their accurate fire disables an 8-inch turret, and the star shells light fires all across the deck. The fight drags on for 45 minutes, during which the gunners fire nearly all of the 5-inch ammunition stored on board. But then a lookout shouts inside the bridge, "Captain, 14-inch splashes behind us!" Copeland looks back, just in time, to see the massive water geysers lifting up into the sky, inches away from their stern. He runs for the EOT and pulls it to full reverse. The ship's hull shudders under the stress as it grinds to an abrupt halt. They even begin reversing when Copeland hears a loud whoosh of shells streaking overhead and sees them slam into the waters in front. Having dodged them, he pushes the EOT back to full flank ahead. But it's too late. An 8-inch salvo impacts the warship. A shell pierces the engine room and bursts the steam pipes of one of the 2 boilers. Another one hits below the waterline, and a third takes out all power and communications. The ship is wounded, and the Japanese can tell. The 14-inch main guns of battleship HIJMS Congo take aim and fire. The 1,400-pound shells smash into the vessel, tearing a huge hole under the waterline. Copeland orders abandon ship. The destroyer sinks as our gunners stubbornly continue to fire. An explosion rocks the insides of turret number 2. The barrel and breech are now so hot, it has prematurely detonated the shell's powder charge. A crew member enters the turret and finds Carr against the wall, heavily wounded, shell in hand. The crew member tries to help, but Carr only begs him for help loading one more shell into the breech, not realizing the gun was inoperable. Back at the bridge, Copeland has no more control, no power of communications. There's nothing he can do. He abandons the bridge alongside First Officer Lloyd Gurnett as shells still fall around and into the dying ship. The pair run to the very bow of the vessel as it rises into the air and spot a life raft floating below. They jump. The burning USS Samuel B. Roberts remains afloat for one more hour until it finally capsizes and sinks under the waves, taking with her 90 of the 210-man crew. The Japanese attack was repelled by the unprepared carrier fleet at the end of the day, thwarting their attempts to intervene in the Leyte invasion and sinking 3 heavy cruisers, including Chikai and Chikuma. But the Allied fleet suffered greatly. 2 carriers and 3 destroyers were sunk, and the rest sustained heavy damage. The chaos of the aftermath delayed the rescue. Men weren't picked up from the sea until 24 hours after the battle had ended, some spending up to 50 hours floating adrift. Engineering Officer Lieutenant Herbert W. Trowbridge and Gunner's Mate 3rd Class Paul Carr died in the encounter. They would both be posthumously awarded the Silver Star for their final brave acts, and Carr would have a guided missile frigate named in his honor. The Tirpitz, second and last battleship of the Bismarck class. was the largest warship built in Germany and posed a serious threat to Allied ships during World War II. It was so dangerous to Allied forces that Winston Churchill made its destruction a priority. In January 1942, he said, "The destruction or even crippling of this ship is the greatest event at sea at the present time. No other target is comparable to it." And so, in the early hours of November the 12th, 1944, RAF airfields across Scotland buzz with activity. Resonating with the rumble of Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, nearly 36 modified Lancaster heavy bombers from the 9th and 617th Squadrons taxi into position on runways shrouded in darkness. Inside, eager young pilots and crew make last-minute preparations for the impending attack. If all goes according to plan, they'll deliver a serious blow to the vaunted Kriegsmarine. If not, for some it may be a one-way trip. Now, one by one, the Lancasters thunder down the runway and lift into the sky. Affixed to hardpoints inside each bomb bay is a gargantuan high-explosive wrecking machine called a tallboy. At 21 feet long and tipping the scales at 12,000 pounds or 5,400 kilograms, they're super heavy, high-penetration bombs designed to take out hardened structures like rocket sites, railway tunnels and U-boat pens. Their target today, though, is the Tirpitz, and at almost 800 feet long at the waterline and displacing nearly 52,000 tons fully loaded, she's protected by 13 inches of steel armor and bristling with guns of every description, the largest of which fire 15-inch projectiles weighing nearly 2,000 pounds at a distance of 22 miles. It's not the first time that the Tirpitz has been attacked. In fact, it's been attacked 24 times before, and for years the RAF and Royal Navy have assaulted the giant ship with carrier-based torpedo bombers, Special Forces frogmen, and mini-subs carrying explosive charges. During Operation Tungsten in April of 1944, Barracuda bombers attacked Tirpitz with 1,600-pound bombs. The ship flooded but was repaired within months. In August of 1944, during Operation Goodwood, nearly 70 carrier-based bombers attacked, but a thick smokescreen prevented them from inflicting any real damage. Then, just a few months before Operation Catechism, there was Operation Paravane, the first mission in which the RAF dispatched Lancasters armed with tallboys to strike Tirpitz in a fjord in Norway. Braving nearly 100 flak guns, one bomb scored a direct hit, damaging the rudder and causing minor flooding. But again, repairs were made quickly. Now it's the turn of Operation Catechism. Will this time be any different? Gaining altitude steadily to 14,000 feet, the pilots set the throttles for optimum cruising speed at just over 200 miles an hour before rendezvousing with the others at the coast and heading across to the Sea of Norway. En route, several lose their way in the mire and one has mechanical problems and has to turn back. Then, just before sunup, the 29 remaining bombers slip through a tiny gap in the German coastal defenses. Ahead, despite having three 55,000 horsepower engines capable of propelling the ship to 30 knots in the open sea, Tirpitz is moored and vulnerable in a fjord near the city of Tromsø. Approaching the target, Wing Commander James Brian Willie Tate fires a flare, the predetermined signal to commence with the attack. Grouped into individual gaggles of between 4 and 6 aircraft at various altitudes, the Lancaster now descend to just 2,000 feet to try and evade the German anti-aircraft fire. Banking northwest, the radio men and the navigators are following a signal being transmitted by Norwegian partisans. But though the Tirpitz's crew has been reduced by nearly 800 men, they're on guard, and unbeknownst to the British airmen, her giant guns have been modified for long-range air defense use. She's also protected by 2 dedicated anti-aircraft ships, support boats with smoke generators, and fighters from JG-5. Then, the guns on and around Tirpitz open up in a bevy of blinding flashes and deafening cracks, sending supersonic projectiles hurtling towards the Lancasters. Lining up thousands of yards out, the planes thunder over the fjord and release their deadly payloads. Once released, the crews wait 30 long seconds for the results. Some tallboys miss their mark and slam into the cliffs and sandbanks along the shore. On the ship, the crew hold their breath as a giant tallboy bomb thunders down and hammers into the deck near the forward gun. There's a cry of anguish as the crew wait for the inevitable explosion. But to their immense relief, the tallboy fails to detonate. But another tears down and smashes into the base of the Tirpitz's superstructure. there's a crang and shriek of metal, and a huge chunk of armor belt is blown away, tearing a gaping hole in the hull. With a massive yellow flash, another obliterates a 16-inch gun turret. Due to serious flaws in her design, Tirpitz doesn't have watertight compartments where they're needed most, and in the chaos, crewmen failed to close hatches designed to contain the flooding in the event of damage. Now, well into the attack, German FW-190s are scrambled. Getting in position over the Tirpitz, the German pilots are dismayed to find the Lancasters are nowhere to be seen and have turned for home. Back on the ship, a column of steam and smoke shoots up to about 300 feet, and within a few minutes, Tirpitz starts to list badly. The captain, Weber, knows it's critical and reluctantly orders the crew to abandon his armored citadel. Through the smoke and carnage, most sailors jump into the water and begin swimming to shore. But like a cork, a devastating explosion tosses a massive turret nearly 100 feet into the air. And when it comes down, it lands amidst a swarm of stricken seamen, taking most to their watery graves. About 10 minutes after the first bomb struck, the Tirpitz has completely turned turtle, with only the hull visible from the air. All told, out of just 1,500 crew, it's estimated that the Germans lost between 950 and 1,200. Captain Weber and all senior officers went down with their ship. Every single crew and plane returned home safely. Winston Churchill, FDR, and Joseph Stalin all sent messages of congratulation to the airmen for finally destroying the infamous German monster, which ironically, according to some historians, never actually fired a shot at an enemy surface ship during the war. It's the dawn of the 7th of April, 1945, off the south coast of Japan. 10 shadows stretch across the sea's surface in the early morning sunshine, a formation breaking through the waves, onwards to their fate. In the center is a giant, a 72,000-ton behemoth. It's a battleship bigger than anything that's come before or since. Armed with 9 18-inch cannons firing 3,000-pound shells, 16 inches of armor across the waterline, and secondary weapons bigger than the main armament of the destroyers around her, she's the pride of the Japanese Imperial Navy, the symbol of Japanese unwavering resolve, the Yamato. On board, Admiral Ito Seiichi looks on from his command seat, supervising the flurry of coordinated and well-practiced activity before him with the characteristic, calculating coldness of any good Japanese officer. Their mission is simple and brutal. Operation 10 Go involves the entire fleet charging the American ships, providing artillery support to the invasion of Okinawa. They are to throw themselves straight through the enemy, beach all 10 ships ashore, and fight to the last. Ito despises the plan. It's wasteful at a time when the nation can't spare an ounce of metal. But the emperor has spoken, and a loyal Japanese officer, he is prepared to passionately fulfill orders to the end, just like all the brave men around him. But that doesn't make the reality that he won't return to his family any less painful. Things are going smoothly when an officer calls to him, relaying that an American flying boat has been spotted shadowing them. Ito orders to open fire, and a handful of anti-aircraft guns come to life, but the plane hides behind clouds before any of the gunners can judge distance and escapes unscathed. The guns fall silent, and the bad news reaches him. He doesn't react, and the fleet continues onwards. The morning passes, and the day carries on, when the bridge receives more bad news. A Japanese-held island communicates that over 250 American warplanes are headed straight for the ships. Tension looms over the bridge as eyes fall over Admiral Ito. He takes a deep breath. It's exactly what he expected, and exactly what they aren't prepared for. He cedes strategic command to Captain Kosaku Aruga and retreats to his seat. Meanwhile, sailor Kazuhiro Fukumoto is passing time on the deck with some friends. He's young and unafraid. After all, what is there to fear with the power of the mighty Yamato on your side? Then, the alarms blare. The friends scatter and immediately run to their battle stations. Kazuhiro runs across the deck, evading other rushing sailors as he rushes for his post on the opposite side of the ship. Anti-air weapons rise towards the sky, locked and loaded. The gunners keep a watchful eye, scanning the never-ending blanket of clouds. Then, everything falls silent. There's a hum of distant engine noises in the sky, spiking the nerves of everyone on deck. Gunners grip their controls, aware they're staring at the angels of death, determined to fight to the bitter end. The noises get louder and louder. In a flash, a wave of warplanes pierce through the clouds, diving straight towards the mighty ship. The cacophony of anti-aircraft weapons roars, and streaks of shining tracers fire into the sky. It's a swarm of warplanes. Dozens after dozens fall upon the mighty battleship, braving the wall of Japanese lead. The gunners fire non-stop towards their targets, giving it their all, but they do little. The fighters respond in kind. A hailstorm of 50 caliber bullets tears through the deck, ripping through metal and people alike. Shrapnel and ricochets fly in every which way as the enemy zooms over their heads. Anti-aircraft guns spin in all directions, gunners tracking their own targets without orders. Muzzle flashes and fumes take hold of the lower superstructure as everything is fired into the sky. The sky is alight with tracers. The anti-aircraft guns are struggling. Planes come down from the clouds, strafe, and disappear back into the sky just as fast as they appeared, leaving them little time to react and take a good shot. There's just too many. Then, a massive explosion sends shockwaves across the deck. The main batteries of the Yamato fire into the sky. Special beehive shells explode in the air, creating a giant cloud of burning phosphorus shards. The big weapons, though, are completely incapable of tracking enemy aircraft in such low flight. The strafing runs do not falter. Bullets and bombs keep raining down mercilessly. Exposed anti-air gunners suffer greatly. They fall in droves with every attack. Brave souls dash across the exposed deck to replace their fallen brothers, only to suffer the same fate. The attack ends as suddenly as it begun, the planes simply disappearing through the clouds and not coming back. In their wake, they leave utter devastation. The deck is covered in men, bullet holes, shrapnel and blood, and a fire burns in the superstructure. Despite the human suffering, the ship itself suffers little more than superficial damage. Her seaworthiness is unaffected, and Kazuhiro's team remains in standby. Back at the bridge, Admiral Ito remains quiet amidst the chaos. Orders and status updates fill the air as the captain attempts to regroup and prepare for more attacks. Ito doesn't intervene. He knows the end result is inevitable. The ship continues sailing towards Okinawa for an hour until the dreaded rumble of engines once again sounds through the clouds. It all becomes a blur as the battle resumes with the same brutality as before. Fighters and bombers fall upon the ship. Explosions rock the deck, and one by one, the anti-air weapons fall silent. No more brave men are present to replace the fallen gunners. Simultaneously, torpedo bombers skim the waves and release their deadly payloads. The captain orders evasive maneuvers, but they're of no use. Kazuhiro watches as two fellow sailors adventure into the lower decks and close the hatch behind them. Mere seconds later, a massive bang reverberates through the ship. The lights go out and water gushes up the hatch, quickly flooding the hallway. He stumbles in the pitch dark, searching desperately for the way back up as the water level reaches his chest and his feet leave the floor. Then, miraculously, something shines weakly above them. The hatch to the upper floor opens slightly from the air pressure, letting a sliver of light through. The men swim towards it and push it open. They climb up moments before their pocket of air disappears. They close the hatch behind them, but they watch, horrified, as seawater shoots up through the seals. Desperate to stop further flooding and believing the hatch was going to burst, they search for a way to reinforce it. The Yamato is mortally wounded. She's taking in water, listing, and there are no longer enough surviving crew members to rescue her. A new alarm joins the symphony of gunshots and explosions. The Ford magazine is at a critical temperature. Captain Aruga orders its flooding to prevent catastrophic detonation, but he's informed the pumps are inoperable. He stares out into the distance, exhausted and defeated. It's all over. He orders, abandon ship. Admiral Ito stands up from his seat. Cancel the operation. Return to port after rescuing the men, he orders. It's the only thing he's said since the start of the battle. A signalman runs out of the bridge to inform the rest of the ships of their new orders. The admiral then thanks the crew on the bridge and solemnly leaves for his cabin. Captain Aruga then dismisses the remaining crew and orders them to abandon ship as well. The guns have stopped firing, men are jumping overboard, and the wounded are being tended on the ground. All the while, the ship lists further and further to port. His officer orders them to throw everything that floats overboard, logs, mats, hammocks, whatever. The port railing sinks in the waves, and the waterline starts taking over the deck as starboard rises up further and further. Standing up becomes a struggle. He almost slips down the smooth deck into the ocean. It's then that Kazuhiro and his group decide it's time to abandon ship. He jumps off the stern and into the murky water below. He tries to swim up, but he can't. The propellers still spin, and he is sucked into the whirlpools. The wrecked and burning battleship slowly turns over as the men jump overboard. Guns fall into the waves below when the Ford magazine detonates. The resulting mushroom cloud is seen from mainland Japan. Kazuhiro emerges from the sea some distance away. He's disoriented. Several black columns of smoke rise all around him. A film of oil floats over the water, and he can see many people floating in the distance. Close by, he spots a group of survivors on a raft and joins them. 2.5 hours later, a Japanese destroyer approaches the raft and picks the men up from the water. Only 287 men of the more than 3,300 would be rescued. Kazuhiro was one of the lucky few. He survived the war and went back to his family. He was only 18. Admiral Ito and Captain Aruga went down with the ship. Operation Tengo was a total catastrophe. Of Yamato's escorts, 5 of the 9 sunk alongside her, and a 6th would be sunk later due to her damage. It would be the last major naval operation of Japan before the end of the war. Thanks for joining us today for our Epic Ships compilation. Congratulations on staying to the end. If you're a hardcore fan, then please consider becoming a member, where you'll get a load of perks, including access to the Discord VIP, where you'll find me almost every day.